My name is Ted Lambs. I am from Brookfield, Illinois, which is about 10 miles southwest of the Chicago Loop. I teach at St. Paul Lutheran School in Brookfield. I've been there since 1969. I've been the principal since 1972, and the place is still standing. I am privileged to work with Pastor Walter Hoffman, who has been at St. Paul to Brookfield since 1962. So we have a rather wonderfully long time heritage and relationship for which I cannot sufficiently thank God. And one of the things that happened to me in the course of last year was, since 2002 is our centennial year at St. Paul's, the Centennial Committee gave me a project. They said on March 21st of this year, you, sir, will give an organ recital containing only the works of Bach. March 21st, of course, if you know anything about Bach, happens to be his birthday. And I had done it back in 1985 when the whole world was celebrating the 300th, right? And I gave myself a project which is really way beyond me. It was to work on a series of compositions which Bach called keyboard practice, part 3. And you must understand that Bach, if you ever understood him, had a real idea in mind. His idea in mind was to do for musical education what he could based upon his theological understanding of things. In my efforts to get ready for this project, I put together a booklet, which I've given to you, not all, but most of it there, which I typed for my congregation. And my effort was to show how Bach was the product, through our Heavenly Father, of a classical education. And in it, I'm not going to read everything to you about it, I try to summarize his educational background, how even though having been orphaned by at age 10, he had gotten apparently a magnificent care by his older brother and began his studies at the same school which Martin Luther attended 200 years earlier in Eisenach, because he was born in the shadow of the Wartburg. And within 3 years, his brother, who was taking good care of him, had to move to the city of Ohrdruf, where Bach then went to Latin Academy. And in his Latin Academy, his training was based upon largely the work of 2 Orthodox Lutheran scholars. One was a fellow by the name of Comenius, and he began his Latin studies there, and Comenius just simply believed if you want to understand language, you have to understand the scriptures. Everything that was characteristic of what he believed about learning words was based upon a right understanding of God's Word, and that's the way he put together his entire Latin program. The other important name that he came across was the name of Leonard Hutter. And Leonard Hutter was the chief Orthodox theologian beginning with the year 1600 and something. And in Leipzig, when Bach was there, they reprinted the edition of his theology, which is just dead orthodoxy. They use it very carefully. But it was all Latin, because you wanted to have a language which was, I think, generally understood, not subject to the difficulties of German. You know that Dr. Luther encountered great difficulty in translating his Bible into German, because which German would it be? And that's why Lutheran schools basically kept Latin instruction. And even at the time of Bach's training, in the town of Eisenach, there were 8 Lutheran schools. Parents had to send their children for at least 4 years, and they had 1 Latin academy. Lutheran education had really dug into, especially that part of the world, I think, largely because the Lord allowed an entire generation of idiotic Germans to be set aside. I mean, if you'd studied Dr. Luther's last days, how he was trying to make peace among warring factions, and then you realize that between 1618 and 1648, was half of Europe, or 2/3 of Germany, was wiped out in the 30 Years' War. But then all of a sudden, when that is gone, something happens to Lutheranism in northern Germany. It takes on a life that it has never known before. For example, before Bach got to Leipzig, by the way, this is from a book that comes from East Germany. Have you ever seen this text? His whole thesis is that Bach is not the product of musical genius, but of Lutheran training. And he had to defend this because in the 19th century, Bach had become merely a cultural hero for the Germans. He was much more than a cultural hero, and that was the whole thesis behind this gentleman's book. And he writes about how Leipzig had changed so rapidly that churches over a period of some 30 years were refurbished completely. The local labor unions went to the town councils and wanted to rebuild them. A lot of the churches, for example, had 3 levels in it. One level was a hospital, one level was an orphanage, another level was a jail. And the preacher was able to preach 3 levels in one day on a given Sunday. He was preaching to all those who were in some sort of need, and the Lutherans cared. In any case, there was a flowering of Lutheran orthodoxy that began somewhere around 1650, and it went for the next 100 years to about the year 1750. And in 1750, of course, that's the year that Bach died, but that's also the great year when the Enlightenment began to take over. And that great university for which Bach went to Leipzig, because he wanted his kids to go to one and get a solid education, began to go worldly. And of course, you know what happened over the next 75 years, how true Lutherans, one in particular, a certain C.F.W. Walther, who went to that university, became so distraught at what he was doing that he followed under certain Pastor Martin Stephan out of Germany. But I wanted to show my congregation how Bach was a thoroughgoing Lutheran, and how his genius was entirely nurtured by his Lutheran upbringing. And in it, I want to give you a few other matters of background. I don't want to talk. I want to have some music over there. I didn't come across this on my own. In 1985, a certain Professor Michael Radulescu from the Vienna Academy in Austria came to give an organ master class to organists, studying one set of compositions that Bach had written from Leipzig called the 18 Great Leipzig Chorales. And for 2 hours, this Roman Catholic could do nothing. Literally, he could do nothing but talk Lutheranism for 2 hours, because you couldn't explain the music unless you talked about, for example, what is the church? What's a Lutheran understanding of what the church is? You could not talk about, for example, counting the number of notes in a piece that Bach wrote, that it had 137 notes in it. Because at the end, it was on Psalm 137, by the waters of Babylon we wept. But he throws one more note at the end, and he goes to the number 138, and he says, I will praise thee, O Lord. That's the beginning of Psalm 138. Now this is no Lutheran. This is no Lutheran. This is somebody who simply has dug in as best he can to looking at what Bach wrote, especially what he had published. Because the vast amount of what he played, he had nothing in front of him. On a Sunday morning, he would have been improvising. He only published things by which he would be remembered, because he did not expect his students simply to learn how to play his music. They were supposed to make their own. And the way he did this was based upon his education. Sometimes I think that when authors write, they don't get their meanings clear. I was interested in one of the titles, The Grammar of Grammar. I think I get it. The idea is that people identify the idea of grammar as just simply learning English rules about speaking and writing. That's not it. The fact is that as a boy, Bach had to memorize. And people in general had to memorize. I would venture to say that at the time of Martin Luther, that if a Lutheran chorale got out and was sung, because most people couldn't read, they'd have that hymn memorized on 2 or 3 hearings. People's memories were simply staggering because they didn't have any other way of getting information. What they took in, and it stuck in the brain. Besides that, if it's a good tune, it's going to get there. And if you add to it rhythm and rhyme, that makes it all the more memorable. That's why the Roman Catholic Church condemned his hymns more than his theological books, because they stuck in people's minds. Now, I'm talking long and hard here. As far as Dr. Radulescu, the next time he came, he talked about the quadrivium. And I say, why can't this guy let it go? You know, but he's talking about music being the fourth branch of math. And how for Bach, he only had an order based upon his belief that God was behind everything, and that the order of things could be known, and that if you wanted to do anything worthwhile which could be remembered, then you ought to set yourself to the task of doing precisely that. Making something worthwhile based upon reality, and something which is based upon God's creation. So, over his lifetime, Bach wrote 4 sets of compositions called Keyboard Practice, and I want to talk to you about something that's in one of these articles right here. I'd like you to take a look at this short one, the Affektenlehre of the Baroque era. This is not me. This is. Am I in trouble? I copied this last week from June 1968. Is somebody going to get me on this? I hope not. No? Okay. This was written right here. There are things for everybody up here. Peggy Kelly Reinberg, along with many others, began to understand something about this difficulty. By the way, I just gave mine away. I got this is mine. And if you look here, there are a few items I'd like to quote to you so you can understand them. In the beginning, the general aesthetics of Baroque philosophy were dominated by the concept of the imitation of nature. Now that's, of course, pretty good, but it's more than that, because who's the inventor of nature? It's God. The symbolism of music and actually experience of the reflection of the parallel relationship of the human to the divine order, which according to the social philosophy of the time served as the basis of human society. Since music, aesthetics, is the study of the relationship of the music to the human senses and the intellect, and the doctrine of the affections or Affektenlehre formed an integral part of Baroque musical thought. Now what does that mean? Well, how many of you ever watched that Ron Popeil commercial? Like about 30 or 40 times, where he's putting out his electric rotisserie. You ever see that commercial? I watch it all the time. He's got an audience there where this rotisserie does all the work for you. And what happens is, he's got this chorus that he does over and over again. You plug the meat in, put down the door, turn on the switch. You set it and forget it. The idea is something is so simple that it takes care of itself and it moves itself. Set it and forget it. When you listen to a Baroque composition, it has basically the same level of volume, the same texture of music. There's a one affection that comes from it, or one impression it's trying to do. It's not like Brahms. It's not like Beethoven, who's real sweet one second and banging his fist the next. The doctrine of the affections just simply means, here's a composition, its texture is going to stay the same all the way through. That was the way the order worked. We don't care about human passions yet. We care how people feel, but passions don't dictate the form. All right. Other thought here. Please turn to the next page. I put things in the margin. How many of you ever taught reading to anybody? Author's purpose. What are the 3 purposes for which authors write? Anybody know? To entertain, to inform, and to persuade. This is real rhetoric. And you see, that's the thought process that's running behind things. to be sure Bach wanted to entertain. That's how many people found relief from their pain and suffering. Imagine yourself being a 15-year-old boy in the St. Thomas Choir, and Bach writes 6 beautiful motets for 5 and 6 voices, along with instruments they have to play. Does anybody know what these motets were written for? They're written for people who are dying. These kids would have to go into some room, some smelly room, where some person was dying, and sing one of these 6 motets to a person who was lying there dying, because what did you want to do for that person? You wanted to move, you wanted to instruct, and you really wanted to give a right and a healthy entertainment. Mozart picked them up one day, looked at them, memorized them in 5 minutes, and said, now this is something from which a person can really learn. That was the purpose behind what he was doing. And he writes these nasty letters to the town council. I need violins that are waterproof. Because they walk outside with them, go to people's houses in bad weather, and you know the whole story. But that's what he actually had to do with his kids from the school. Sing somebody into heaven. Now, please go down further. If you notice at the bottom, there's a box. In great Latin tradition, according to the traditions of St. Gregory and St. Augustine, letters have numerical value. And Peggy Kelly Reinberg here gives the Latin alphabet and numerical equivalents. And below it, I wrote something down there for you. If you take the letter values of the numbers B, A, C, and H, you get the number 14. Add to that the value of the letters J, S, and then go B, A, C, H, and you get the number 41. 14 and 41. Why are these things so important? Because God knew Bach picked him. And he used these numbers throughout his entire life as the basis for the structure of his thought. I belong to my Heavenly Father. Now, I didn't get that from me. That was Michael Radulescu pointing to a composition in which, at the 41st measure of Lamb of God, pure and holy, in the middle section of God the Son, right smack in the middle is a little figure, da-da-da-da. And Radulescu says, that's Bach. That's the Lutherans who believe in this for you business. For you. For me. Jesus died for me. And that's the way he sticks it in there, right in the 41st measure of the middle section. He does that also with the big composition here. Anyway, remember those numbers, 41 and 14. In his life, in keyboard practice part 1, which is the 6 partitas, anybody ever played into the Bach partitas? I can't. They're hard. There are 6 of them. Now, Bach writes things in 6s. He wrote 6 suites for cello. He wrote 6 Brandenburg Concerti. He wrote 6 Schiebler chorales. He wrote 6 other things. The 6s go on forever. The 18 Leipzig is 3 6s. But what he does is, in the 6 partitas, I'll give you a chance to figure it out. Take a wild guess. There are variations on a harmonic theme with different dance rhythms in there. How many movements do you think there might have been among these 6 partitas? Anybody want to toss a number out? I don't know. 41. 41. His second composition is based on copying Italian and French music, which he did assiduously. In his logical level of his instruction, this man physically copied music he wanted to remember. He physically copied the organ works of French composers. And later in life, what he had copied from them, he would try to apply to what he did with Lutheran chorales. He copied them. His brother was mad, because he's copied from his brother's copy of these organ works. And the reason his brother was mad was there's no copyright law. His brother's book had just become worth 50% less in value. So he took the book back from him. Now, there's no nightmare story here. Albert Schweitzer likes to make fun of his brother beat up on his kid because he was so talented. Utter nonsense. His brother took care of him, but he buried the book. because he was a musician too. His second keyboard practice involves two compositions. The Italian Concerto, you all know that one, don't you? How many movements does it have? Three. The second one is a French overture, in which he takes French compositional styles and dance rhythms and puts them together. How many movements do you think they have? Toss a number out. 7? Try 11. What's 3 plus 11? 14. Okay? You come to the keyboard practice part 3. Keyboard practice part 3 has exactly 27 compositions in it. He's got a plan. Now, mathematically, is everything special about the number 27? What?
3 times 3 times 3.
Dead on. Exactly right. It's a number symbolizing the Trinity. 3 times 3 times 3. Do a little math.
At 14.
What's 41 minus 14? The man has a plan, okay? And that plan is terribly important. There are exactly 27 is the difference between 41 and 14. And in these compositions here, that can be seen and reflected as easily as can be. What's my time? Can't see. Right. And I tell you these things because I'm going to have my dear friend of these last 3 days, who is a wonderful kindred spirit of mine, Dr. Stephen Hoffman. He has set himself to the task of putting together some musical examples from Bach's Keyboard Practice Part 3. And Steve, you want to introduce yourself? Some people know you. I'm glad that I do now. Go ahead.
I'm Stephen Hoffman. I serve as mentor at King Lutheran Church in Cheyenne, and also here at St. Andrews in Laramie. I teach organ at the University of Wyoming, across the street. And
Well, you're doing fine. He's a student of Dr. Marilyn Mason from the University of Michigan, but who also talks the same way. I'll talk about one of the compositions that we're going to show you later. She put us up to it because she brought her students out to play Keyboard Practice Part 3 on a tour. And I went to hear it, and she spoke the same way. So it was magnificent. So thank you. Anyway, what we could do here is take a quick look at, first of all, the whole plan. In Keyboard Practice Part 3, Bach was trying to show people how to make music for the organ. We do not know that in any case that he had intended for any of these compositions for use in the liturgy. They are all certainly liturgically appropriate, but it may not at all have been his intention. His intention was probably to show especially his oldest son, Friedemann, how to make music for the organ rightly. And he took a Lutheran pattern. First of all, he writes a prelude, which has 3 themes to it. It is written in a very unorganistic key, the key of E flat. There were very few organs that sounded good in E flat in Bach's time because people were not agreed about how to tune an instrument. I think my good brother and I would probably have a few arguments about tuning instruments today, but very often the notes you would need to play it wouldn't be on the organ. They saved money in not putting in keys for keys which they thought you didn't really need to have. So you'll find organs with a short octave where you can't hope to play it. It has 3 basic motives to it, and it's all synthesized in this 3. If you count up the number of measures in this piece, there are 205 measures. Anybody know math? Anybody know prime factors? 41 times 5. This man is thinking all the time. He's got a plan in mind, and he's making a personal statement about it. What's interesting then, too, is the final fugue. The final fugue, again, is in 3 sections, and he's going to play that whole fugue for you, right? You can do it for us? Good, I'll shut up. And it's in 3 sections. And it's also in 3 flats. It is not friendly to the traditional organ which Bach would have had to play. It is divided into 3 distinct sections. And the second section is divided into two parts. Now, can anybody figure out why a second section of a Christian composition might be divided into two parts? What do we believe about Jesus? He is true God and he is true man. And the rhythm in it, we'll show you later, is very confusing. It's confusing because Bach leaves us muddled. Are we playing 3 notes at a time or 2 notes at a time? And I asked Dr. Hoffman that, he gave me a very good answer. Well, which is it? Is it 2 or is it 3?
Yes.
Yes. He actually does it just simply to confuse the issue, because what we believe about Jesus, he is one person. So we don't have actually 2 halves here. We have the idea of the Christian creed being set to music. The other compositions in between consist of writing hymns on the Kyrie, music for the Kyrie. There are 6 compositions on the Kyrie which Bach put in here. One, thinking because Luther has how many catechisms? He's got 2. He's got the small catechism, he's got the large catechism. And each one of the chorale he puts into form here. One is for full organ, for a large organ. The other is for keyboard instrument only, no pedal. Why? Because you're thinking about 2 levels of thought. He has 3 on the Gloria big, 3 on the Gloria small. Then he goes, not the Gloria, sorry, the Kyrie. On the Gloria, he takes Luther's Gloria. And he writes 3 compositions on it. So now we're at 9. You've got 3 plus 3 plus 3 from the liturgy. You've got 9. That's all by plan, by design. In 2s, hard and easy. For the learned, for the beginner. And then you go to the next section. The next section consists of the chorales on which Luther's catechism is based. It goes from the commandments to the creed, to the Lord's Prayer, from the Lord's Prayer to Holy Baptism, to confession, and then to the communion. And he does 2 on each. A hard one, large catechism, a smaller, easier one, small catechism. And believe me, he has the words of the text in mind. He is not writing like Mozart an abstraction, a musical piece devoted unto itself. He's writing something that is really concerned for what is in the text. The last 4 compositions are what we call duets. And they're just simple 2-part pieces which Bach was trying to show the French that a German organist could do as well as they could. But he wanted to get to that number 27. And those 4 duets are about as hard as 2-voice pieces you could ever want to see. Every one of them is a bugger. I mean, he takes harmony, he takes every rule because he was an experimenter. He took the rules of music and stretched them as far as he possibly could, but you always knew where you were harmonically. He tested everything. One final story then we'll start. He joined a musical society called the Misler Musical Society. And it was a society in which famous composers of the day were invited to write compositions challenging the laws of music. So one day they come to Bach. He says, I'm going to think about it. How many members you got? Oh, we have 11. Well, when it was the 14th time for something to be considered, Bach said, okay. So he's the 14th member, when they got to his turn in line, he wrote a set of variations on From Heaven Above to Word Thy Come. And they're all what they call canonic. And he does it just to take the rule of the canon and stretch it as far as he possibly could. But what's the basis for it? From Heaven Above to Word Thy Come. One of the simplest tunes in the world, the most complex organ music, but just taking music and putting it at the service of his Savior. So let's begin. Dr. Hoffman, let's take a look at, first of all, perhaps 3 motives in the E-flat prelude. If you want to, go ahead.
Can I just make one?
Sure.
The key of E-flat major, which is sort of a bugaboo on the organ because you've got those black keys and you've got big fingers like mine.
I've got
hard to get in between. But the key of E-flat major, just like the pieces in 3 sections, has 3 flats. The key signature has
Absolutely. And the idea is that every one of these sets, no matter what it is, it's not a matter of separate composition. He's not thinking 27 compositions here. He's thinking one. Okay? Whatever he published, he was thinking as an organic unity. It's not like a Beethoven symphony where you go movement 1, movement 2, movement 3. Oh no. This guy had a plan from beginning to end. In the 18 Leipzig chorales, you can count the number of accidentals that he puts in. 27. Okay, he's thinking, how am I going to arrange this? And when you have this invisible counting, this secret arithmetic of the soul, that's what underlies everything. It was terribly hard for me because Bach didn't start with Mozart, he didn't start with Beethoven, he didn't start with anybody else that so often young kids have to start with. He had to start with the tune that he knew. That's where he started, and he learned to fix the violins with his father. He was a violinist, the most accomplished violinist of his day. He could play the viola, he could play all instruments because his dad was a town piper, and as such he was responsible to fix all the instruments that belonged to the city. And Bach missed 50 days of school, his first year of school, probably sick some of the time, probably having helping fix violins the other time. So he actually had these instruments physically in his hands since he was 7 or 8 years old. Incredible. Go ahead, give us 3. If you want to know how to probably take a look at the 3 modes of the Breakout Session. The first is the French overture. A French overture in March. Like King Louis XIV. King Louis XIV. Now, the second part is drawn out of that alone. Dr. Hoffman can show you how the second theme comes out of the first. Now, if I say how something comes out of something else, if I ask for a word or euphemism that might describe this. Go ahead. That rhetorically in his own thinking to take something out of the other. And also there's a book called Terrace Dynamics on the organ. There's a beginning section which stops on a more powerful keyboard. It clicks down to the lower one of the very few times the Bach used directions is out of play. And then following it comes a rather stretched out, tenuous, chromatic, rhythmically tense form. And you see what is joined with the second begotten of the Father, he becomes sin for us. All these tensions which we associate with our own humanity, they form the second motive in the program. Now the third, the Holy Spirit coming down, ascending, proceeding. Several times, and in fact, there's 8 changes in between there, where one goes back and forth, thus showing the unity of the composition, showing the 3 persons of the Trinity, and having at the same time one single affect by it. One single affection, not a bunch of others in one. Go ahead. Back to the overture. Unfortunately, we got to take the whole thing in. Thank you. Please turn to I actually had my congregation sing the chorales for which Bach would then proceed to move. And I'm on, what's the 3rd page, the top of the page there says, the Kyrie. The Kyrie in the real Lutheran hymnal, T.O. The Kyrie has actually 3 sections to it. It's just, this is Luther's adjustment to the Kyrie. It's that which would have been sung in his German Mass, so the congregation would sing this. He put this into German, but he kept, of course, the Aleluia at the end. Bach followed the pattern which previous composers of the Lutheran heritage did when he organized his 3 compositions on this basis. But before we do it, let's sing. Can you do that? Give us a little bit. It's right here. has three different sections to it, at least. It can be larger, you need three. One of them, where the organist is at about head level. And in German, you would call that the Hauptmeer, because it stood at head level. If the organist stood up, that's where it would be. And usually that is the most powerful division of the organ, the Hauptmeer. It stood on top. Larger organs, we put a cone on top above that one, or an overwork above it, but you stack the organ, it will help like this. You have a smaller division in either of two positions, either one directly under the Hauptmeer, down here, or there, or the bosom there. In some churches, that division is located on the gallery rail behind the organist, in which case you call that a Breakout Session. Well, that division had a sound similar to the one above it, but it was lighter in tone, it was more intimate, especially if you had a Breakout Session position. It's the one that's right over the congregation's head. It's the division that's closest to the congregation. Thirdly, you usually have the pedal pipes which wouldn't fit unless you gave them special space. You usually put them going from the highest parts of the church in two towers. A tower on one side and a tower on the other. C here, C sharp here, D here, D sharp here, alternating either side. Those were towers. When you look at the theory, you have to have Bach's understanding of the organ in mind. The Father. When Bach writes his prelude on the first of these, excuse me, I don't fit. Here we go. He puts the melody, what they call the cantus firmus, right up here at the top, in these long notes right here. See that note, that one, that one, that one. Takes a break, about the screen. Shift to your right. To my right. A little more. Got it? Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Thank you. Long notes. There is the first part of the Kyrie. Go ahead, set it for me. Thank you. All right, thank you very much. And that's where the chorale is heard. It's heard on the top. Okay, and that's probably where you would have played it on the organ. When you go to the first piece of the second section, which deals with quite a bit, there's more about that. Those first three notes, everything about that composition is based on those first three notes. Bum, bum, bum. All the accompanying notes, they all come from that first word. You want to help me again? Am I okay? Jesus is our mediator. In the second one, the melody moves to the middle position. It's found here in the left hand. And you see, if you had an organ like that, you probably would have played the music right behind the organist on the Rick Positive, because that's the one that's closest to the congregation. Now, what does being the closest to the congregation have to do with Jesus? That's how we know God. He became one of us. And you see, that's part of his thinking in his compositional style. The more intimate one, the smaller one, the one that is comprehensible, he becomes one of us. So the melody moves to the middle. Look at the key word. What's the verb? What's the verb in the Holy Ghost section of this piece? It's the word guard. And what do you put in the organ on either side? Where would a guard do his job? On the tower. And that's where you put the pipes which stand for the Holy Spirit, the pedal pipes, the tallest ones. They are the ones which are usually the most powerful. They have the gravity of the organ, and that's why the melody would occur here in this particular case. Here it starts, right there in the pedal. So the melody moves down in accordance with the doctrine of the Trinity: Father, Son, Holy Ghost. And he doesn't do this just once in a lifetime. He does this over a series of compositions which anybody who knows them knows exactly what his plan is. In the 18 Leipzig chorale, same thing. He often takes a composition and breaks it up into three parts just for that particular reason. Brother Steve, you want to give us a little taste of each? First,
we're going to have to both start this one and finish it. Now, I'll ask you to find a good spot I want you to finish. In the last words here, who vow our last hour bless, let us leave the sinful world with gladness. Now, you notice it's in Bach's frame, because right when he gets to the point where he's going to play that last away in zone, he takes a scale and just takes right at the scale, as though somebody were leaving and going to finish. And all of a sudden comes crashing down that way we have mercy of everything left behind. And what follows then is this tormented, hellish sound of life on earth, or the chief motives that are called minor seconds. And Bach takes minor seconds, diminished thirds, every manner of sort of strained harmony, and says goodbye. Just like that. Go ahead, start it and find a good spot. Start in the middle. Very difficult. In the seventh composition, Bach writes 3 for the Lord, because obviously it's part of the liturgy. He writes 1 in the key of F, 1 in the key of G, 1 in the key of A. And he writes 1 in ascending order, because I think it's how to get the doctrine of the Trinity. The first one is written in triplets. The
the number 3. The second one has what's called a trio sonata form, something that Bach would have copied from the Bach as a key. And he would have tried to reshape it. In classicism, we talk about this as the logic of it. You take a composition that somebody has put in one form, and you change it and you put it into another. He copied all kinds of other composers' works and sent it for order for keyboard, just to learn how to deal with what's called musical figuration. Leonard Bernstein talks about a composer having 2 problems. The musical life he has to develop it, and he has to do variation. Develop and have variation. Well, how do you do this? You can't do it. And you take somebody else's idea, and you make it your own. So he, as a kid, when he copied these Italian concerti and Italian sonatas, he would then take them and apply them to the chorale phrases he would do right here. That's what happened to this one. Do as best you can. He did not work on this one, except for me today, the second one. Well, let's sing to him. He'll play a portion of the second one, the Italian trio sonata, which shows the rhetorical. In the rhetorical style, you take what somebody's done over here, take what you learned over here, put it together, the chorale. order here is clear to anybody who understands classical thinking. Thank you. 10 Commandments. This one's fun. This is the only hymn, by the way, which is mentioned in the small print. I don't know if you know that. And when Luther talks about the Christian going off to follow his vocation, how do you go off facing the day? You go off facing the day, singing a hymn joyfully, like that of the 10 Commandments. This is the one of Luther's hymns that's mentioned in the small catechism. And Bach does interesting things with this one. I had more fun with this one than any other one. Because if you look at the language of it, it's very important. Let's just sing 2 verses, and then I'll talk for a moment, and I'll watch my clock if you got a minute to get out of here. So. This is the first stanza and the last stanza. I think that both stanzas were in Bach's mind when he put the composition together. You understand that when you look at it, there are, in TLAs, we only have 5 phrases. We sing upon the Mount Sinai, straight through. When Bach phrased it, he split that up. He sings upon the Mount, Sion, how do you say it in Sion, Sinai, in German? How do you say it if you name it in German? In any case, if you look at the notes for the word Sinai, you'll notice you have a little upside down third going up and down. If you turn that upside down, upwards, what do you have? You got a little mountain. Okay? You turn it upside down, it looks like a little hill. That's the primary motive for the entire bass section of this piece. The word Sinai. You're on the mountain. He puts the mountain, that's his geometry, puts the mountain in the middle, all the way through. Okay? He's got that there. You're thinking about Moses. Secondly, if you realize the number of phrases throughout, the number of phrases is 6. 6, according to John, is the number for sin. Secondly, third, you have the idea of the word canon. The word canon means law or rule. This is a hymn about the law. So what is Bach going to use? He's going to use a canon. A canon is essentially the beginning of either the line, beginning at the second point, different point, and each one staggering, follow along the other. There's only one follow. And at one point, it's going to stop. It's going around once. Now, that's the third one. Fourth one. In Baroque music, a descending chromatic line. You want to find me one there, descending, stands for sin. Like at the beginning of the piece, somewhere. Measure, got the drum beat here. It will measure 5 in the alto. Got it? Right. Measure 5 at the beginning of B and D alto was a B flat, A flat. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at chromatic scale can belong to any tonality. So he puts in there a symbol for sin, and that symbol for sin is terribly important, because when Bach gets to the end of the composition, the canon runs out. And where's the canon? Who are we singing about in the second stanza? We're singing about our help us through Jesus Christ, for we a mediator haven't thee. Here it is. It's in the middle. There's a mediator in the middle, and you notice at the canon at the octave begins at the end of the measure. You want to play a little of the canon so you can hear so how it works. And by the way, for extended music, this is called composers. Let music write itself. In other words, when you start a canon, you've got 2 lines guaranteed to be short. You get one started, the other one follows along right underneath it. Go ahead. Can you start to measure? Just give them the canon first. Middle line on the canon. This is the canon works. I'm sorry. No. Just play the pianos. Sure. He's thinking about everything he's got. It's okay.
There's another canon in there too.
There's several. Okay. Just take that. Okay. Here's what Bach really, if you aren't theological, you don't get it. Have I got it there? There you go. In the last phrase, the one voice has to stop. But look what happens. Bach takes that romantic scale, which I'll show you right here. He puts it right here. This voice is done. Okay? And this is going down for the last time. He takes that chromatic scale and he marks it right down on top of it. What happened to our mediator? He took our sin on himself. So that's how you would show that pictorially in music. There's no other way to explain why somebody would do that. Unless it was the first phrase and it became the last phrase. You don't talk about the first. Yeah. Do the beginning here. Do the beginning here. Goes up to about just the first phrase. And then you jump on the new place. So you're aware that's the big thing. there. Yes, sir.
So, Bach uses trivia over
Yes.
conversation. Can you just briefly state that?
The idea is here in the trivia that his grammar is the chorale that he learned as a kid. And he knows the words. Because there's no point in having a chorale unless the words with it. All right? He lived in a day and age which had a very good memory. And those men, that memory was enriched, I said, by both the melody and by rhyme. And Luther used it very effectively. That's the kid who lost his mother, his father, and his own gift to draw more closely until all of them was ever about. Second, the logic of it. As a kid, he copied, especially the French composers and the Italian composers. And what does he do with the copy that he makes? In some cases, especially in the case of the Italians, he revises them, he reshapes them. He takes some of these ideas and uses logic and makes something different out of it. But he follows a model. He follows a structure, just like you heard the first lecture. You know, he had ideas there before he started to produce. Third, if you go to the rhetorical, you take your ability to write a copy, French overture, and that becomes the problem of this piece. You take an Italian trio sonata, and you write a prelude on all words to go on. That's the rhetorical level. And the fact was, Bach, like I said before, he knew this so well that when he played, he seldom needed any reference points in front of him. He didn't need music. All the great players in fugue, which we know, with the exception of one where follow up here, there are no copies. There are no versions. His students had a copy. He was their teacher. They had to physically copy the notes. He would give them two subjects to start. They would start playing. It was a good idea. I'm not trying to go this way. But the fact is, by the simple act of copying, they were learning how to make their own. That's exactly what he was trying to do. Because, as I said before, his intention was not to make kids learn his music. His idea was to go to the art of rhetoric, which means you can make up your own. You can synthesize an idea over here on your own, and make it. And there's a great lower story that ends all this, and that's, of course, the tragedy of his son, Wilhelm Friedman, for whom he wrote all of his work. Friedman was probably the greatest organist of his day, but people stopped going to church. People stopped tying theology and reason together. Leipzig went down with the intellectual flood. And so poor Friedman has this talent, all this genius, and guess what? Nobody cares. And so it's one of those pitiful stories. But the good side was, well, along comes a Jew, Felix Mendelssohn, who also got that title in record music in Leipzig, and he was for Bach's title. And he began to look at the second time. And he was the one who was the first person to play organ works of Bach in the 19th century. He was a close friend of Victoria and Albert. They loved to hear him play. He played the organ at St. Paul's Cathedral, Mendelssohn's favorite organ piece. So was one of myself and that. Sometimes he plays along with a guy who's pumping the organ with grit. Simply go on. But the fact was that Mendelssohn was right along. Mendelssohn and Jew baptized Lutheran named Bartholdi in the year 1830. He was commissioned to write a symphony of the anniversary of the Augsburg Confession. Guess what the tune was that he used for his fortune? Some of them had fortunes. So there was a recapturing of yes, Bach, but not necessarily his theology. That theology will probably close at every time. That's what was read at that point in time. And there was others, like Dr. Wall was a term of real organist. That would be much Bach at all. I think you writing most of it. because there's no association with Parents groups from Germany coming over to the Saxon language and learn much of things about Bach at all. We got a few minutes. You want to take that, just to take over the meeting for 5 minutes, turn tables for you? Do you want to listen to it? I'll shut up. I'll get out of here. By the way, the fugue is in 3 sections. There are 5 voices in the first section, 4 voices in the second section, and there are 5 voices in the third section. We remain.